The jungle was a living furnace, breathing heat and steam onto the 5 remaining members of Reaper Team. Mud, the color of rust and smelling of decay, clung to them like a second skin. It was in their boots, under their nails, and smeared across the stocks of rifles that were now little more than useless clubs. The clicks of empty magazines had become their death rattle, a final, percussive count to the end. Master Sergeant Kane lay pressed against the slick roots of an ironwood tree, the bark digging into his cheek. He could hear them now, the enemy, not as a distant threat but as the rustle of leaves just beyond the veil of green. They were methodical, patient predators, tightening a net of their own making. This claustrophobic pocket of the Honduran rainforest, once a target, had become their tomb. Kane's world, once governed by procedure, strategy, and the comforting certainty of superior firepower, had shrunk to this single, suffocating point of failure. Every decision he had made in the last 48 hours had led them here, to this final, desperate stand with nothing left to stand with. His gaze fell on his radio, its silence a mockery of the technological dominance he had always taken for granted. Jammed. Utterly and completely. A ghost flickered behind his eyes, a memory from the insertion 2 days prior. He saw Specialist Anya Sharma, her face framed by the dark green canopy, looking absurdly small and academic next to the hardened operators of his team. Her file had been a puzzle he'd had no interest in solving, a doctorate in ethnobotany cross-trained in signals intelligence. To him, it was a contradiction, a sign of a military trying to be too clever for its own good. He remembered watching her during their short halt, carefully scraping a bit of lichen from a tree into a sample bag. Hulk, his massive breacher, had nudged him. "What's the egghead doing, boss? Collecting souvenirs?" Kane had just grunted, a sound of pure dismissal. He had seen her as a distraction, her delicate scientific equipment a liability in a world of brute force and rapid movement. The memory sharpened, focusing on the moment it had all gone wrong. They were pulling back from the compromised objective, the enemy hot on their heels. Sharma, burdened by a pack filled with sensors and spectrum analyzers, was lagging. He made the call then, a harsh bark into his headset. "Sharma, you're a liability! Your gear is slowing us down. Fall back to the secondary rally point." "That's an order." He'd seen her stop, her shoulders slumping for a fraction of a second before she turned and disappeared into the foliage, swallowed by the jungle he was now certain had killed her. He had told himself it was a tactical decision. He was cutting loose a slow-moving asset to save the core of his team. But now, in the suffocating silence, the decision felt less like tactics and more like sacrifice. A sacrifice he had made. Back in the suffocating present, the rustling grew closer. Rico, his leg tourniquet and pale, was fading. Doc was out of plasma, out of time. Hulk gripped a combat knife, his knuckles white. Ghost, his sniper, lay motionless, his gaze fixed on a gap in the trees, as if his sheer will could conjure a target and a bullet to meet it. Kane knew it was over. There would be no dramatic rescue, no last-minute reprieve. There was only duty. He picked up the useless hand mic, a final act of command. He knew the enemy was listening. He didn't care. This message wasn't for rescue. It was for the record, a final log entry written in sound. He pressed the transmit button, the static hissing in his ear. "Reaper Actual to any friendly station. This is a final transmission." His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, stripped of all authority, leaving only defeat. "Mission compromised. Objective failed. We are surrounded and out of ammunition." He paused, the words catching in his throat. He looked at the faces of his men, their eyes all on him. "We are not coming home. Godspeed." He released the button. The static cut out, and the ensuing silence was absolute, a profound and terrible emptiness that seemed to suck the very air from their lungs. This was it. The waiting. The end. They sat in the quiet gloom, a tableau of grim acceptance. Kane closed his eyes, the faces of his wife and children swimming in the darkness behind his lids. He began reciting the names of the men around him, a silent memorial for the living. The oppressive silence was then pierced by a sound so alien it felt like a hallucination, a short, sharp burst of static from his radio. He ignored it. The enemy was toying with them, probing their discipline, waiting for one of them to make a noise and give away their exact position. But it came again. Not the random hiss of jamming, but a structured, rhythmic pulse. Did-did-da. Did-did-da. A pattern. Ghost shifted his weight, his voice a barely audible whisper. What was that, boss? Kane shook his head, refusing to allow the fragile ember of hope to catch. Nothing. Enemy trying to get a rise out of us. Stay quiet. Yet, the pattern repeated, cleaner this time, cutting through the background noise with an impossible clarity. It wasn't the sound of jamming. Jamming was chaos, a brute force sledgehammer of noise. This was a key, searching for a lock. Against all reason, against every ounce of his training that screamed it was a trap, Kane felt his heart begin to pound, a frantic, desperate rhythm against his ribs. The static suddenly coalesced. It resolved itself, the chaotic noise funneling into a single, pure carrier wave. And then a voice. It was female, calm, and so unnervingly clear it seemed to be originating from inside his own head. Reaper Team, this is Specialist Sharma. Do you copy? The shock was a physical blow. Hulk's jaw went slack. Doc, who had been murmuring to Rico, froze completely. Kane felt a surge of disbelief so powerful it bordered on rage. It had to be a trick. A digitally manipulated recording, a cruel piece of psychological warfare. He snatched the hand mic, his knuckles white. Who is this? Identify yourself now, he snarled, his voice a low threat. The voice on the other end didn't even waver. There was no fear, no panic, just an unshakable, professional calm. Master Sergeant, it's Specialist Sharma. I am 5 clicks from your position, bearing 095. I disobeyed your order to fall back. I assessed that my primary duty was to maintain communications integrity for the team, and retreating would have negated that function. My position offered a superior tactical advantage for signal interception. The team exchanged looks of stunned astonishment. The woman he had cast aside, the specialist he had written off as dead, was alive. And she was talking to them through a comms blackout that a multi-billion-dollar military machine couldn't penetrate. How is this possible, Sharma? Kane demanded, his mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. Comms are down. The entire spectrum is blanketed. Sharma's voice remained steady, taking on the tone of a professor delivering a lecture. It was this academic quality that he had once scorned, but now he clung to every syllable. Negative, Master Sergeant. The enemy's jamming isn't a blanket, it's a net. And every net has holes. They're using a wide-spectrum frequency-hopping jammer, but it's a field-expedient setup. The power source is unstable. There was a brief pause, and Kane could almost picture her on the other end, checking her instruments. I traced the power signature. They're using the sap of the Adalia Cohune palm to create a crude biobattery. It's effective, but it emits a unique, low-frequency electromagnetic field. I was able to isolate it, and use it as a baseline to filter out their primary jamming signal. Kane was speechless. She was talking about fighting a radio war with palm trees. She continued, her voice gaining intensity. Once I filtered their signal, I needed a way to transmit through the remaining interference. I found a significant colony of Messina leucantypes, a bioluminescent fungus that grows on decaying ironwood. It's fascinating, really. The fungal network, the mycelium, responds to specific low-frequency radio waves by fluctuating its light output. The entire root system of this jungle is laced with it. I modulated our frequency to match the fungus's resonant signature and interfaced my transmitter with a probe driven into the mycelial mat. I didn't find a way through their jamming, Sergeant. I turned the entire jungle floor into my antenna. A sense of profound, earth-shattering awe settled over the men of Reaper Team. The egghead, the bookworm he had deemed a liability, had single-handedly outsmarted an entire enemy force using skills he hadn't even known existed. Her quiet observation of plants, which he had dismissed as a frivolous hobby, was the very thing that was now punching a hole through their doom. Master Sergeant. Sharma's voice cut in again, pulling him from his stupor, her tone shifting from academic explanation to decisive command. I haven't just bypassed their jamming. I've hijacked it. The audacity of the statement was breathtaking. There is a prevalent species of liana vine in this region, Sogenia communis. Its core is exceptionally conductive due to high metallic content absorbed from the soil. I've used it to create a feedback loop. I'm rerouting the bulk of their jamming signal to a decoy transmitter I fashioned from a spare battery and a comms relay, located approximately 2 clicks east of your last known position. Right now, their entire force is converging on a ghost signal I created from their own power. The situational irony was staggering. He had cast her out, and she had used the very earth he'd abandoned her on to build their salvation. She had not only survived, she had turned the enemy's greatest strength into their most exploitable weakness. The weight of his failure, of his catastrophic misjudgment, pressed down on Kane with suffocating force. He had been so wrong, so blinded by his own rigid definitions of what a soldier should be. He had looked at Specialist Sharma and seen only what she wasn't: big, loud, physically imposing. He had never bothered to see what she was. And what she was brilliant. What she was their only hope. Her voice returned, sharp and precise, leaving no room for argument or debate. It was the voice of command. Your position is no longer tenable. They will realize their error within the next 20 minutes. I have established a secure, narrow-beam communication channel that you can navigate by. It's a line-of-sight signal, weak but stable. Think of it as a corridor. As long as you stay in it, you are invisible to them, and we stay connected. She paused, letting the information sink in. I have identified a viable extraction point on the southern bank of the Rio Cabra, 6 clicks from your position, bearing 210. An Osprey is being diverted. It will be there in 70 minutes. You need to move now. Another pause, this one charged with the full weight of their lives. Then came the simple, chilling, and life-altering command. Follow my signal. And don't stop until you reach the river. In that moment, Kane was faced with the most difficult choice of his career. He could die with his pride, the commander who refused to yield, or he could live by submitting to the authority of the subordinate he had so arrogantly dismissed. His entire being screamed against it, but the faces of his men, pale and hopeful in the gloom, made the choice for him. With a deep, shuddering breath that felt like the snapping of a steel cable inside his chest, Kane keyed the mic. The words were gravel, forced up from a place of profound humility he hadn't known he possessed. Copy that, Specialist. We read you 5 by 5 inch. He looked at his team, seeing the flicker of hope in their exhausted eyes turn into a steady flame. We're moving. Lead the way. He got to his feet, his muscles screaming in protest. Hulk, you have Rico. Doc, stay with him. Ghost, take point. Follow the carrier wave. Let's go. A faint, rhythmic pulse began to sound in their earpieces, a gentle, guiding heartbeat. They moved out, a shambling, desperate line of ghosts melting back into the jungle that had almost been their grave. The journey was a breathless ordeal, a frantic, mud-soaked scramble through tangled vines and over slick, moss-covered rock. They moved with a purpose they hadn't felt in days, driven by the steady, reassuring beep in their ears. Behind them, they heard the distant, confused sounds of the enemy converging on the decoy, shouts, sporadic gunfire, the frustrated revving of an engine. Sharma's Phantom was leading them on a wild chase, a masterful deception painted on a canvas of jungle electronics. Every step they took was a testament to her genius, every meter gained a rebuke to Kane's prejudice. He wasn't just following a signal, he was following a miracle. They burst through the final wall of foliage, gasping, and stumbled onto the rocky shore of a wide, churning river. The air was cool and clean, washing the fetid stink of the jungle from their lungs. And then they heard it. The sound that every soldier dreams of in their darkest hour, the percussive whump-whump-whump of inbound rotor blades. A-V-22 Osprey descended towards them, a magnificent metal angel sent from heaven. As the ramp lowered and his men scrambled aboard, Kane looked back. High on a ridge overlooking the river, he saw a solitary figure silhouetted against the failing light. She was small, unassuming, calmly packing a strange-looking antenna that seemed to be woven from vines and leaves. Specialist Sharma. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, then disappeared back into the shadows she had so thoroughly mastered. Hours later, back at the forward operating base, the debriefing room was thick with tension. A two-star general looked down at the mission report, his face a mask of confusion. "Master Sergeant," he began, his voice laced with restrained anger. "This report reads like a work of fiction. You were surrounded, out of ammunition, with total communications blackout. An hour later you're extracted without a scratch?" "Explain." Kane stood ramrod straight. This was his final test. He could have taken the credit, spun a story of his own daring. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that redemption was not found in hiding from the truth, but in championing it. "General," he said, his voice clear and steady, "the report is accurate. But it is incomplete." He turned and looked towards the back of the room, where Sharma stood quietly, almost invisible against the wall. "We were saved by Specialist Anya Sharma. She single-handedly defeated the enemy's electronic warfare capabilities using principles of botany." The room was silent. "She didn't just save my team, sir. She has given us a new weapon. Her understanding of how to weaponize the natural environment, to turn it into a communications network, it needs to be the new standard. She is the reason we are standing here today." He held Sharma's gaze, and in that moment, he offered the only apology that mattered, a public declaration of her worth, a sacrifice of his own pride on the altar of her quiet, undeniable competence. Justice had been served, not by punishment, but by the profound, world-altering power of a truth finally brought to light.